I'm really honored to be here. I have the absolute pleasure and privilege of hosting Dr. Lisa Cameron, Member of Parliament. Dr. Cameron is the Scottish National Party MP for East Kilbride, Strathaven and Lasmago. A trained clinical psychologist, she spent a career advancing mental health and public good. Until being elected in 2015 to Parliament, she's been elected twice since, where she's continued her important work. Among her many important roles in Parliament, she's also the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on crypto and digital assets, which of course brings us here. So first of all, Dr. Cameron, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to speak with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me along. I'm delighted to be here. It's great actually to be out of Parliament for the morning, but also to be linking with people who are on the front line of the fintech industry and really hearing from the front line as to what's happening, people's thoughts and engaging, because as part of my work with the group, it's really important that we engage with industry, and that's one of my key priorities.
You know, I've been in this industry for 5 years and, you know, talking about the importance of regulation, and I couldn't agree more. This engagement between industry and regulators, especially at a time like this, is really important. But of course, you've been very active for a while, even before the past 2 weeks and everything that happened. But, you know, before we even, there's a lot to talk about, but before we even go there, I did want to start by asking, how did you become involved in crypto in the first place, coming from this space of mental health and working with the National Health Service? How did you become introduced to crypto? How did you become engaged? And what was your experience so far?
Yeah, I mean, I actually started the journey. I came in from almost, you know, not expecting to be involved in this sector. One of my constituents had a negative experience. Really, they befell a scam online and contacted me and asked me, can you put me in touch with the people in Parliament who are working on cryptocurrency and digital assets? And I said, of course I can. I'll find out who they are and I'll let you know. Then I started to do some research, and I'm trying to find if there's a group, what's happening. I realised at that point in time there have been no debates whatsoever in the House of Commons on this issue, and there's no cross-party working group. I mean, we have hundreds of cross-party working groups on so many different issues, and I'm thinking, my goodness, let's do some further research. I'm looking and I'm seeing almost, you know, 5% of the population are involved in some shape or form in this sector. Millions of people across the UK. And I'm thinking, why are we not, you know, up to speed and working on this? So nothing was really being done to the level that it should have been at that point in time. And I said, well, you know what? We need to look at this. We need to be at the cusp in terms of fintech development, the technology in terms of the crypto and digital asset sector. And we need to make sure that parliamentarians are up to speed, and we clearly weren't. So it's been 8 months of hard work so far in developing the program that we have, educating ourselves, and actually, at the start of the journey, we were even trying to get up to date with the language and terminology used. So I had to explain to many members of the House of Commons and House of Lords that Fiat wasn't a make of car, and that, you know, we've had to really upskill and bring ourselves to the point where we can begin to have informed, evidence-based debates and therefore policy making and regulatory framework development moving ahead.
Well, you know, I think people often complain that regulation when it comes to crypto is slow. I have the sometimes unpopular opinion of that I actually believe that it's moving relatively fast if you look at other asset classes in the past, and it's without a question thanks to the work to the work of legislators like you. I think it's safe to say that you've been one of the most vocal, constructive, and engaged legislators in the UK and perhaps the world, if I may say that.
Thank you.
Now, there's obviously a big, there's obviously the FTX implosion is on everyone's mind. It hurt millions of people and really hurt the industry's attempts to create more trust and build reliable, safe, and regulated services. You know, everyone is more keenly aware now of this question about regulation. There was a session earlier about is crypto going to fizzle out or not, and a big part of the answer goes through how legislation and regulation is going to enable that. And I do want to emphasize again that your work, you've been doing that work long before FTX, almost anticipating events like that. And so I want to ask you to maybe go a little deeper into the APPG's, the All-Party Parliamentary Group's work. Maybe understanding of the current amendment of the Financial Services Markets Bill, and of course, the inquiry that you currently have out. What should the public know and expect?
Yeah, absolutely. The work that we've been doing has had consumer protection and regulation at its core, and that's my journey into this sector was via my own constituents' experience. And MPs across the United Kingdom have constituents who have had positive and negative experiences. So whilst we need to harness the potential and innovation and definitely be at the cusp of this crypto wave in the UK to realise the Prime Minister's vision of the United Kingdom being a hub of cryptocurrency, we also have to ensure that we have on our journey a regulatory framework that gives confidence to the markets, to investors and to consumers, because that's, when we have that balance, that's when we're going to be able to push ahead and make sure that we create the jobs of the future and the industry of the future that we want to see here. So part of that is, as I said, we started on an education journey with legislators, and we've been inviting, I suppose, educational talks, and we've actually gone out to industry as well to look at what you're doing on the front line and to look at, what the jobs are, how this links with our universities, how it links with research that can be undertaken, how we can level this industry up right across the United Kingdom as well. It's very London-centric, I would say, but I think it offers great potential to the whole of the UK, and we need to ensure that it also has a levelling up agenda. But the All-Party Group are now engaged in an inquiry which is about realisation of the Prime Minister's vision for a cryptocurrency hub, what the challenges that we face are in that regard, but also what the great opportunities are. And we're going to provide some initial recommendations to government as early as January, February next year, because we feel that there is there has to be a pace to this. It was a crypto sprint government had, not a crypto crawl. So we need to, work at pace. And we want to have our initial recommendations in January, February. So far, we've taken a vast amount of written evidence from industry, from regulators, from other legislators as well in terms of international best practice. And we're working our way through that and assimilating it into recommendations. We've had the first oral evidence session, and we now have another 2 to 3 oral evidence sessions to finish this month and into December before we compile the report. And when the report's compiled, it will be presented to government and also on the floor of the House of Commons, as is traditional. So we really want your engagement. This is a partnership, and what I want is for people to contact myself and the All-Party Parliamentary Group. Please don't be shy. Get in touch. Let me know your thoughts. We also want to look at use case examples because MPs are saying, yes, we understand, a bit more now about decentralized finance and some of the opportunities, but what we want to see is how is this going to change people's lives? And, one of the things that's really made me very enthusiastic is the realization that, yes, a lot of this work we're looking at fintech developments and technology, but so much of it is beyond that as well. With the blockchain technology, we have the capacity to make sure that our UK aid gets to the most vulnerable, and we can use the technology to try to support that work, to make sure that, we cut out the middle organisations where some of the money, goes instead, and that we make it, work and stretch as far as possible for the most vulnerable. So we're looking at developments beyond treasury, and in fact we're looking at cultural developments as well in terms of NFTs and sports. And so the DCMS committee are now looking at an inquiry report. I'm encouraging the International Aid, International Development Committee to do their report, and the Treasury Committee are also doing their report. So there's actually a lot of work now gained momentum in the Parliament. And as you mentioned, there's some bills as well that have come forward where we're going to be looking at progressing with stable coins, and obviously there has to be some further secondary legislation around about that. But really, thank you for those who have engaged. We have built momentum. We are pragmatically working forward on a bespoke regulatory framework for the UK, and it's with your help that we're achieving that. So please continue to engage. If you haven't reached out already, do so, because we want this to be a partnership, and we have to, in my mind, have a pragmatic what works path ahead. Obviously, you mentioned FTX, and that's, caused, I would say, being quite open with everybody, reputational damage to the sector. And I know that there's a lot of concerns that have been raised. But when I looked at the figures, is this... people have asked me, is the industry finished? Actually, when I looked at the figures, and it was around about 5% of the population engaged, it's almost doubled in the past year. I would say that progress is continuing to be made, momentum is still being built. People across the UK remain interested and engaged. And what we need to do then is double down on efforts to have a regulatory framework that gives confidence to investors and to consumers moving ahead. And I think what's happened with FTX just re-emphasizes to me why that has to be at the core of the work that we're doing.
Thank you, and I have to emphasize again that the work that you've been doing has preceded FTX by a long time, as well as some other events. And I also want to emphasize to the audience that in my personal experience, Dr. Cameron is really open and accessible, and so I just second her. Please reach out. So much depends on, at the end of the day, the public engaging with regulators and legislators and engaging with crypto safely. I want to maybe dive a little deeper into the FTX question, and in particular this question that has been growing in the industry, and I know among regulators as well. I had the opportunity to be on Capitol Hill about a month ago and meeting with regulators in Singapore a few weeks ago. I keep on thinking about the fact that at the end of the day, Bitcoin was introduced as a response to 2008. And part of the idea was, assets and financial services that depend less on centralized entities, and therefore on incidents like what happened with FTX. I think to me, before this is a crypto story, it's just a story about bad corporate governance and entrepreneurship without checks and balances and accountability. But at the end of the day, Bitcoin was introduced. Most of the activity today still takes place in centralized places. And a lot of people say that this is a really great opportunity to advance, kind of pure decentralized blockchain-based services. However, some in the industry fear that there's going to be a coalescing of this idea of decentralized finance and centralized crypto trading. And I'm just curious to ask you, where does that meet you?
Well, my take on that is I think the industry and the sector is very diverse. And I think that's going to continue to be the case, to be honest. I did have the opportunity last month to attend the Bitcoin conference in Edinburgh and spoke to, I was calling them evangelicalists, but they're not really, they're maximalists, aren't they? That's the terminology. But they were emphasizing to me, that Bitcoin is the way ahead, and that was their viewpoint, and that, there was almost a message of, well, you don't really need to bother about any of the other types of cryptocurrency or the industry beyond Bitcoin. However, our group is taking a very broad view of the sector and is looking at, the innovation and technology and the jobs of the future, and how that's going to link with our universities across the UK. And it's beyond finance in that sense as well. It's about young people's opportunities moving ahead. And I see that as being quite diverse rather than as being purely linked with Bitcoin. But they have given me a number of books to read on this and to try and change my mind. So, I suppose from their point of view, they would say the jury's still out on that. I've got to get back to them once I've read the reading materials they've given me and give them an update on my position.
I'm so impressed that you find time, because I know how busy you are. And I think that's just such an important point, that the industry, not like any other industry, it's not a monolith.
No.
Just like in traditional finance, there are less regulated and more regulated ways to engage in finance. There are going to be more centralized and less centralized ways to engage with digital assets and crypto. I like to think about it that to think about the fact that decentralization is not a binary; it's a spectrum.
Yeah.
And it's so encouraging to see legislative leaders like you who really keep in mind that it's not a monolith. So thank you for that. I am curious to ask you a little bit. So I had the opportunity to see you speak in San Francisco. I know you also go in a lot of other places, and you mentioned a little bit the element of working with global legislators, because this is, at the end of the day, any way we look at it, a more global asset class, whether we like it or not, than any other. How has been your experience working with legislators in other parts of the world?
Well, that has just been so important for the work we're doing. We are where we are in terms of Brexit. No matter if people voted to remain or leave, we've left. But that does give the opportunity for the UK to create what I would call a bespoke regulatory regime here to maximise our competitiveness, but also to make sure that we have the underpinnings of a good, confident, robust system for investors. So speaking with legislators, we've been out to Zug with the all-party group. We've spoken to legislators there about their journey. I've also had engagement with Brussels about MiCA. I've also been engaged with some of the congressmen and a senator from the Legislators Conference in Washington just in the past few weeks. And also now we have had some reach out from Canada as well. So we actually think that, exactly as you said, it's very, very important that we work together internationally, because this, is the sector is international, cross-border. A lot of the positivity about cross-border remittances and being able to provide finance and opportunity for people who have traditionally not even been involved in the traditional finance sector means that inclusion, engagement, international cooperation is going to be at the core of what we do. So we are looking at international best practice, and obviously we're also looking at evidence of perhaps where we think there are bad actors working as well, and that we don't want the UK to be emulating those types of regimes either. I don't think we need to have a race to the bottom here. I would be saying to people, the UK is a great place to come, establish business, to innovate, and we have fantastic institutions here. We have skills in this sector that are second to none. So what we need to do now is get the regulatory framework and the legislation process up to speed to support and harness the potential going forward. And that's really, what we want to do. And that's with a mind on where the UK sits internationally, and also within the framework, as you said, of international best practice.
We always say at Solidus that, really pushing crypto to safer and better places is not a one company job. And I think maybe it's fair to say, based on what you're saying, that it's also not just a one country job.
No.
But there are leaders, and I think, definitely the UK has been instrumental. We have a few more minutes, so I want to ask you, a little bit for your message for two different groups, and maybe starting with, companies like ours and the industry as a whole. We work with crypto companies that are trying to monitor for risks and be as compliant, as regulated, and safe as possible. What is your message for the industry? How can the industry move away from constantly just saying, we want regulatory clarity to actually help legislators and regulators advance that.
Absolutely. This is very key, and actually much of the industry have already reached out in terms of what I want to know is about the practicalities. What are the difficulties? What are the challenges that are faced? Now, I'm aware that there are current issues with opening bank accounts for companies in the UK, so that's something that we're going to be flagging up and highlighting. We're also looking at, the process where there have been some procedural problems with the FCA in terms of having registration of companies who have found the process very cumbersome and very difficult without adequate supports, I've been told. So I've been having engagement with the FCA to try to streamline and help them. And I know that actually they're working very hard. And actually I would blame industry to some degree on this, because they do tell me the more they bring people in and train them at the FCA, the more those people are poached by industry, back out to industry, and then they're starting again. So please do leave some of those experts in at the FCA so that we can continue to harness this process and push it along. So yeah, I would say engage, and what I want is, if you can be very specific with me as well during the inquiry as to what would make a difference and practically what we can be highlighting to government, then that would be very helpful.
Okay, so I hear engage,
Yeah.
have conversations, and don't poach too many people. all very important. And so my last question, maybe one before last, because I have one that is not necessarily just about crypto for the end, but what is your message for the public? You've spent a career advocating for mental health and wellness, and obviously there's so much correlation between financial health and stability and mental health. So what is your, at the moment like this where there's so much concern, how would you, what would be your message for people on how to engage with crypto, how to make sure not to miss this opportunity to get better access to finance, but at the same time do it safely?
Yeah, I think, I'm really pleased you mentioned that, because one of the key things for me is that, financial education is not something we're doing enough of. Across the public, but also in schools. Even just general financial information and education is not at a good level in our schools. When I started in the Parliament, I put in a question about, financial education in primary schools, because there was a psychology report that came out that said your relationship with money, begins at such an early stage in your life, and that's the relationship that you carry throughout your life. So at the formation of that, we need to have healthy relationships with money, and we need to have an informed approach. So I think we need, through government awareness, but also I would say industry can be supportive of this as well, is to improve financial education in schools, in colleges, in universities, and also now, given the technological advances throughout the whole population and across the lifespan, because this sector and this technology, I'm very enthused about it. Despite the issues we've had, I still think it offers tremendous potential. But I do think, as you say, we need to have the consumer protection element, and part of that's going to be about regulatory frameworks. But another huge aspect of it is education and information. And we really need to also in the Parliament have a focus on how we collaborate with industry to make that happen.
Wonderful. And I guess one last question, which is a bit of an open question, because before we are all, crypto maximalists or work in this industry and in finance, we're all citizens. And I was just wondering if there's anything else that you're working on currently that you think it's important for people to know. I know you're hosting a fundraiser for Ukraine. So just because, believe it or not, Dr. Cameron does a lot that is not just related to crypto.
Yeah, I do. And we've been doing so much work in the Parliament. I also chair, and it's such a privilege to chair the disability group in the House of Commons, which is absolutely a fantastic group that's reaching out to help the most vulnerable. And when we've been hearing about, the information about people's harrowing accounts of life in Ukraine, and I was thinking about those disabled children who, have been impacted, and by all accounts, many have been left behind within the war situation that they're in. So we're hosting an event tonight, which is a fundraiser to support children with disabilities in Ukraine, and we have great support from government at that fundraiser tonight. And also, thank you so much. We have tremendous support from industry as well, because we want to make sure that we reach the most vulnerable. And I do think that this sector has the capacity to create financial inclusion, and also to do tremendous good. Sometimes we focus on the sensationalist impact of events in the finance markets like FTX, but we also need to have the balance in that we can take forward a very positive, progressive vision, and this industry can play a huge role in that, and tonight's event is part of that, and it's going to make such a difference. I can't thank everybody enough who's involved in that.
Thank you so much. Well, I mentioned to you, my family comes almost in its entirety from Ukraine, and we have 30 members of the Solidus family who work in Ukraine and had to run during the conflict. So thank you so much for everything you do to advance safe and regulated crypto and financial opportunities, mental health, and beyond. Dr. Cameron, thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.